Hello, and welcome to this session with filmmaker Lisa Immordino Vreeland in a conversation about Truman Capote and Tennessee Williams. My name is Thomas Keefe. I have been editing the New Directions Tennessee Williams titles since 2002. I'm also a Tennessee Williams scholar and consultant, and I do a lot of other things. Much of my time is spent teaching acting and theater in New York City at Pace University. Lisa, welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you. Thank you, Thomas. And you are, happily, I can say that you are the Tennessee Williams expert. And you came a little bit late in the game for me, but you have been so helpful. And I just wanted to be appreciative of it and really tell you thank you so much for being part of the film.
Thank you. I'm very glad. I'm enthusiastic about the subject and your work. I'd like to give Lisa a brief bio. I think she needs her due, and I also think you'll want to know about her background. She has been immersed in the world of fashion, art, and culture for the past 25 years. Her first book was accompanied by her directorial debut of the documentary of the same name, Diana Vreeland, The Eye Has to Travel, 2012. The film had its European premiere at the Venice Film Festival and its North American premiere at the Telluride Film Festival. It went on to win the Silver Hugo at the Chicago Film Festival and the fashion category for the Design of the Year Awards, otherwise known as the Oscars of Design, at the Design Museum in London. Her second film, Peggy Guggenheim, Art Addict, premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival in 2015 and had its European premiere at Art Basel. Her second book, Love Cecil, came out in October 2017 to accompany the film, Love Cecil, that premiered at the Telluride Festival. Immordino Vreeland curated and directed the award-winning short film series called Art of Style for the digital fashion network, Made to Measure. Those 12 films explore the creative expression of innovative designers and capture their strategy of style. She continues to create work for collectors, galleries, and museums. Her fourth film, Truman and Tennessee, An Intimate Conversation, was accepted at the 2020 Telluride Film Festival and will be playing festivals worldwide throughout 2021. The film currently is the winner of the Best Documentary Feature at the Santa Fe Independent Film Festival and winner of the Best LGBTQ Film at the Key West Film Festival. Most recently, Truman and Tennessee, An Intimate Conversation, has been picked up for distribution by Kino Lorber, which means that festival participants will have a chance to see a preview showing this Sunday, March 28th at 6 p.m. You can check the festival website for details and a link on how to reserve a ticket. So great. What I'd like to do actually to start with is to talk to you a little bit about your background coming into filmmaking and your first project. What got you involved in Diana Vreeland, The Eye Has to Travel? What inspired you to make that film?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I certainly have a very unorthodox entry into filmmaking, and it's not. I didn't go to film school. I studied art history in college, and I've always loved photography. And I think that what really drew me to filmmaking was just the idea of becoming a storyteller. And it's been, and in a funny way, Mrs. Vreeland introduced me to that. I'm married to her grandson, Alexander, and I wanted to really redefine her for a new generation. And I did it. I started to do the book, the Diana Vreeland, The Eye Has to Travel book. And from that, I decided to make a film. And I realized that I would have access to people. And so I just started, and it was done in a very, I traveled with a DP for 2 years, and we traveled all over the world, and we just started to make it. And I think it goes back to the idea of these 20th century visionaries and wanting and questioning their creative process, also questioning what they're given to the world and trying to redefine it for a new generation. And I felt that she in particular needed that. And that kind of led me down this path to doing it with other 20th century figures. And it was a great first experience because Mrs. Vreeland had this, I never met her, although I've been with my husband for quite a long time, but it was just toward the end of her life that I got to get with my husband. And, it was just, she had a joie de vivre that was so fantastic. And bringing her to life on the big screen was just a joy because, you just see her on camera and you understand what she was all about. Because she was fantastic. She was just full of positivity and just this kind of sense of that life is dreamy. And it was so much fun to recreate that for a new audience.
Right. I imagine that you say that you started it as a book and then that led to making the film. I imagine with a lot of these huge characters, these artistic and all other kinds of visionaries, that there's something powerful about their natural charisma that you
Mhm.
get on a film that perhaps you cannot necessarily convey in the same way in a book.
I think so. Well, what's the whole, I'm not a writer. So you are a writer. You're a beautiful writer. And, and I express myself I love the idea of being able to express myself visually and then with words. And what's nice about a book is that you can tell your stories in a different way. And in a film, then you can tell it in a different way. And in the same sense of with the Love Cecil book that I did, there've been, I don't know, Beaton himself published 35 books in his lifetime. So how am I going to contribute to the book life of Cecil Beaton? And what I did was I actually did it in a kind of a backward way. I did it through all of the beautiful archival material that I fell in love with and that hasn't been seen. And so, there is a different way of expression, but books, in the pandemic, everybody was saying, well, I guess the moment before the pandemic, people were saying, well, books don't sell that much anymore. My gosh, I mean, can you imagine how well they've done in this time? I mean, it's
Extremely well. Well, the notion that don't books don't sell is anymore is preposterous.
great.
Sell in different ways on different platforms, but they certainly sell. And yes, they've done very well in the pandemic.
And I'm not sure I really answered your question, but for me, being able to have a book and a film, which doesn't always work with every story, I certainly did not do that in the Peggy Guggenheim Art Attic because I didn't think I could contribute another art historical book. And I didn't do this, I'm not going to go up against the words of Tennessee Williams and Truman Capote by doing a book. Okay. That was too challenging.
Interesting to me that you followed up the Deanna Vreeland projects with the Cecil Beaton projects, which also involved a book and a film. So clearly it didn't scare you away.
Mhm.
And you felt that you wanted to have that duality of platforms for telling the story. I thought it was fascinating that Cecil Beaton was the next person that you decided to devote that amount of time to. How long did it take you to work on, all told, the Vreeland book and film?
I've started, so my filmmaking career it's been about 10 years, 10, 11 years. And I think Vreeland took maybe 2.5 years, but when it comes to really editing the film, because, there are different moments in making a film. There's a pre-production, it's filming interviews, it's doing research. And, I'm very old-fashioned in the way that I do research because I don't use archival researchers. I do it myself or with the team. And then I do all of the reading, and I read a book, a proper book, I underline it, and then I transpose those notes into a computer. So it's a very slow process. But as I'm doing all of this, I'm actually absorbing a lot of material. And so it's an important process because the story unfolds before my eyes in this way. And each film, it's usually a 2-year process, but that includes research, editing, and I'm working with the editor and then all the visuals. But I would say at the most a 2-year process. For instance, Truman in Tennessee, an intimate conversation, that took, I think it was maybe a 5-month edit. And that's a short edit. It's not a very long edit.
Interesting. Did your photography or art background, which
Hmm.
led to the fit of Vreeland? I mean, I know there's the family relationship to Vreeland, but also there must have been something more in terms of your background.
So I was born in Italy, and I was born in Milan, and I grew up going to being exposed to a lot of things, seeing a lot of things, traveling in Europe. And photography has always resonated with me since I was a child. And just seeing things, looking at churches, looking at objects and things that, just, when the days we used to go to mass, our church was Santa Maria delle Grazie in Milano, where the Last Supper is. Okay, that was, those things, they affect you. I mean, and it was not, I could actually, if I wanted to, I could have touched the Last Supper. Okay, I had that kind of exposure, and that's what my life was. And all of these things, these things seep into you, and just like watching films seep into me. I love neorealistic films, and I think of the imagery and the messages of the films of Visconti and Fellini, Antonioni, and Vermeer, and I think of the cinematography, and there are all these things that have definitely stayed within kind of the touchstones, whatever touchstones may exist in my brain, and Mrs. Vreeland was somebody who obviously was a topic of discussion in the house, but I didn't know that much about her. And I really, the desire to make these films, I think the driving force is my curiosity and wanting to know the story and wanting to understand the guts of a person. And it's the same way that, I felt that way about Mrs. Vreeland, because I was like, what is so great about her? Okay. And I discovered it. And it was absolutely fantastic to discover it also myself instead of being told why she was so great. And it was the same thing with Peggy Guggenheim. As a child, I remember going to the Peggy Guggenheim in Venice. And I may have even crossed physical paths with Peggy, for all I know. And, when I was studying art history, I remember reading her autobiography and saying, it was like, gosh, I was like, that woman is ballsy. She is really, really ballsy. And it was kind of a natural next film. And
Oh, of course, the Guggenheim was second. All right, and then came the Beaton. Excuse me.
right, but no, but that doesn't matter, because what's interesting is that they're all kind of slightly interconnected. They all knew each other, and if they, it's this world that existed at a certain time.
Part of what I was getting at there and thinking about was that you have told these three visual stories about three very visual people,
Yeah, yeah,
right? And obviously, Jana Vreeland is in the world of fashion, but what could be more visual, or what could rely
sure,
not on words but on the visual?
yeah.
And same with Guggenheim, and same with Beaton. And then tell me if you don't mind rattling it off, the subjects of the 12 art of style
Oh,
films.
sure, sure. No, the art of style was actually, it was a gift to me, because in my very short career as a filmmaker, I had also made films on people who were no longer alive. So and they're long films, but it's a challenge also to have to make a shorter film. And so to define a shorter film, it could be from the span of 15 minutes to half an hour. And that was the ideal length of the art of style films. And so I made films from interior designer and collector Axel Vervoet to Dries Van Noten to designer Erdem in England to Iris van Herpen to art director Fabienne Baron to Tom Brown. Then George O'Keeffe, there was a wonderful exhibit at the Brooklyn Museum on her style. And I worked very, very closely with the George O'Keeffe Museum in creating this whole story. And, we were out there shooting. And then, my dream project was the last film, which was Jean Cocteau. And it was this kind of wonderful short on Cocteau and his world of dream. And what's fascinating is, first of all, to be given the chance to create a series like this, have a producer who supports you with your vision. And we co-curated it. And it was a treat, but also I was making films on living people and also making films that are shorter in length. So it was it just kind of gave me growing room to be able to create new material. And I approach the material very much the same way, if it's a short film or a long film. And the long films, though, you just, you kind of, I look at it as a total picture because I look at the characters' stories, okay, their life stories. I look at their archives, what the archives can give us. And when all of a sudden I see that the archives are rich with visual material or other material, because it brings us to Truman, Capote, Tennessee, and an intimate conversation. All of a sudden, what is their archive full of? Words, which is fascinating.
Right. And this is one of the things that I wanted to explore next. How did you go from creating narratives, creating stories, and which is really important in all cases. Like when you say with Cecil Beaton, there were 35 books already. What story are you choosing to tell? To then telling a story about two artists who are not visual, who are really, although to an extent they both
Yeah,
tangentially, but really the words are their forte.
sure.
And brought you to Truman and Tennessee. Well,
No, it's
is that you
it's
came
a
to,
very, go ahead.
oh, I'm sorry. My understanding is that you came to Truman first.
I did. What it was an interesting challenge because I think that as I become more comfortable in filmmaking and with my choices, I started, because I guess I'm always thinking about trying to make a film that's going to have impact on a new generation of people, and trying to retell these stories of these 20th century greats who are being overlooked because people are thinking about other things. And I'm being kind of stubbornly stuck in my little world of my things that I find so important. And thinking about Truman, who's obviously a good friend of Mrs. Vreeland, and then a very good friend of Cecil Beaton. So he's, and also was stayed at the Palazzo with Peggy Guggenheim in Venice. So it was just kind of funny. So he came up in my mind as a subject, and I said, I want the one thing that we all think of Truman Capote is we see him stumbling around after it's all post In Cold Blood, that his life is just kind of starts to really take that decline completely. He has complete fame, and he's just remembered more as a drunken writer. And we want to see him, we want his words to be celebrated. And so I took him as a character and I said, okay, I would like to really do something on him, but I want his words to be celebrated and I want his words to tell a story. And I'm not going to focus on this latter part of his life. What happened in the interim, I knew someone else was making a film and they came out with it first. And it was very different because we all tell stories in different ways. And but my producer who I work with, Mark Lee, who's been part of my team now for a while, he said, let's add Tennessee Williams, who he's a huge Tennessee Williams and a theater fan. And so we added Tennessee Williams into the story. And all of a sudden it just flung open the doors to a completely different story. And, I knew that they were friends. And I knew that they were both celebrated writers. They both rose to fame in the same years. They had a friendship. They had a rivalry. They both came from unhappy family situations. They both were homosexual. They both were addicts. They both were insecure. But then they both had these words that could tell the story. And
I was back to your list that they were both Southerners.
And they're Southerners, of course.
In love with Italy.
Yeah, exactly. No, and they're Southerners, and they had this kind of expat life that was so exciting that, of course, totally attracts me because I have to have some part of the stories that I tell embedded in Europe, which is so important to me. And so really the approach to the film and the way that I was thinking of it artistically didn't change at all, because we had already gone to Ischia, which was that funny moment in the film where Both of them were there. They stayed at the same pensione. And we had shot that all. So it was, we just had to add some other things onto it. But we wanted them to have this, like the idea of an intimate conversation. We wanted to be able to create that in the film through their words. And honestly, I had done all of my Truman Capote reading, all of my research. I was really set with him. And all of a sudden I kind of tumbled into the world of Tennessee Williams and fell in love with it and fell in love with him.
Well, talk about a personality who other stories have already been told.
Yep.
As you learn, so many biographies, so many volumes of letters,
Yep.
so on and so forth. How did you decide on? Well, you said you already had the format of the words speaking for the authors, and then the conversation, which somebody pointed out in one of the reviews, is technically not a conversation in the sense of it was a conversation before, but is a conversation that you create.
It is,
Which could be misleading if things are taken out of different contexts. I didn't find it that way because somehow the way you narrate and give us the information, you're on certain topics which with each of the men and things that they each addressed, which then become part of whatever the conversation is at the moment. But anyway, I would love to know, is this a particular style of documentarian filmmaking?
I don't know.
Because you don't, Lisa chose not to have any talking heads, expert witnesses in the film. There's footage of both of the men being interviewed, and there is footage from their work, quite a lot of Tennessee Williams films. But there's nobody talking about them. Mostly it's their words. And is that something that you've encountered? Something I had not encountered before, so I'm curious to know in the documentary film world if it's a thing.
Well, I kind of feel like I'm not really in the film world myself because I don't,
But
I'm not, I just kind of do my thing. And the fact is that when you have all of a sudden the freedom to be able to tell a story like this, you want to do it in a certain way. I knew I never wanted to have talking heads in this. I knew that they have the words to tell the story. And there was something, I do think that we got very lucky that there was this brilliant David Frost interview. I think the David Frost interview, the film is really embedded in the David Frost interview. It starts like that. And it gave us this kind of launching pad to go off into these different directions. And, it's not, because, by definitions, what is a documentary? And there's so many different ways to say it. And I just feel like I'm making a film. And I want to know that I have the creative freedom to make it and to be able to tell the story. And in a case like this, I'm not doing a biopic, never for a moment. It's really, it's almost like we as the audience we're eavesdropping in on the two of them, on Truman and Tennessee having a conversation. And frankly, if I can convince you and let you personally as a Tennessee Williams expert, as the Tennessee Williams expert, if I can convince you that it's actually can work and it really does sound like him, because I want the audience to feel the essence of these people, of these men, of any of these characters. And I think that because of that, we really had the freedom to create what we wanted to. And we weren't tied down to having to tell a life story. It gets so boring to have to do all of those things. We could just kind of go from subject to subject, but we took these moments that we knew that they were together, or episodes that they were in the same city, their love for Europe. So there's that kind of whole expat section. And we just kind of gave ourselves the freedom to have them talk together about things. And I think it worked in a funny way because it's unexpected.
I think it is unexpected. And I'm curious to know though, before, I don't want to give my observations on the film. I got to see it fairly recently. What did you learn about these men as artists and characters? Because there are so many narratives out there, and it's something that you mentioned at the beginning, is there are narratives about Capote, there are narratives about Williams, which you would have come into this project with, and then, going all the way through it to the end, how do you perhaps see them differently now than you saw them at the beginning? Or what do you think is revealed about them? I'm curious to know your perspective on that, and then we'll hear more about what your audience thinks.
Exactly. I mean, we are going to hear what the audience thinks? Oh my
But
gosh.
once it gets distributed.
Yes, exactly. It could be a frightening thought of what the audience is going to think.
Quite a few reviews, and those have been, some of the people complaining it's not a biopic, that sort of thing. And people always get that. You didn't tell the story I would tell. Okay, fine. But in terms of the story you do tell, what's your takeaway from this film?
Well, it's funny because, I mean, just thinking about the reviews, and let me get back to the question, but it's always interesting to see the comments that people give. And there was someone who said, oh, well, why isn't more of the black and white ball in there? I'm like, why bloody hell should the black and white ball in there? I mean, this story is about these two great literary voices that from a young age had this just desire and this need to write, okay, to create. And they needed to do that. They both had that at a young age. And it talks about their struggles of, first of all, becoming famous, becoming well-known, and, Tennessee very much at a later age than Truman. And, what we tried to do is to create this intimacy between the two of them, but then which would allow all of us to have an intimacy with the characters. And, in Tennessee's history, I just was not as familiar with it. And, I got from the very end that, he was a lonely man. He was a lonely man throughout his whole life. And he created this world for himself with these incredible words. I mean, his words, his writing was just, it just brought you into another world. And I fell in love completely with Tennessee. And the problem was for me to validate more Truman against him, okay? And to validate Truman's words. And Truman was on the make from a young age. That's where, he's really very much a product of reinvention. He really, from a young age, he wanted to do something. He was on the make. He was very much like his good friend, Cecil Beaton. And he was also a beautiful writer. But then he really, when he fell hard. And what I loved about Tennessee was that he continued to write. He continued to write. It didn't matter if what the critics thought. But he needed that writing until the very end of his life. And that's how much of an artist he was. So I learned a lot about them, but there was a richness in Tennessee's soul that was just gave me so much joy to be able to work with him as a character. I didn't feel that with Truman. And I'm not saying this just because we're at the Tennessee Williams Literary Festival, okay? I'm saying that because that's what I felt.
Well, it really comes through. And frankly, it's more sympathetic of Capote than I've normally seen or that I'm aware of. I mean, I'm not steeped in Capote's life and work. Mm-hmm. He comes off as sympathetic. Williams comes off as very sympathetic. And in a balanced way. You don't skim over their difficulties. You don't skim over their troubled, some of their troubled relationships, personalities, or the addictions and the drug use. And one of the things that really, to me, is I don't know if the word is most potent or not, but it really got to me, is that once you get into the 60s, into the 70s, and you know that Williams is on the outs critically, mm-hmm. and he has been addicted to drugs and had a lot of problems, the voice of the writer who comes out is extremely compassionate and sympathetic. And yet you see him on the David Frost show. And the David Frost clips are amazing because the setup was the same. I don't know if it was for all the years of the David Frost show. So you can switch out one man to another man in the chair. And Williams is clearly on something. He is not in good shape. He is making strange faces. It's
Flicking his lips a lot. He's doing that tongue thing he did anyway, but he's definitely on
well, but he's doing sort of weird things with his. He's not well,
something.
and that to me shows the dark side of all of it. And at the same time, the writing that's coming through, and even at certain points, the relationship between the two men is sympathetic,
Mhm.
and that's unusual.
Well,
You also get into um, giving us an interesting portrait of their partners and companions,
yeah,
which frequently gets overlooked.
it does. And we didn't, we could have, well, as you know, Tennessee Williams had lots of partners, but not serious partners. Okay, one in particular that we really do focus on, and Capote really had some partners that were just a disaster toward the end of his life. That's straight men who he was kind of convinced to be in a relationship with and took advantage. I mean, it got very, very ugly. But it's something that I can't overlook is the fact that when you're making a film like this and you realize that you can use the words of these important literary voices, because I also work very closely with all of the estates, and that's important. I mean, that's actually where you came in when I was working at the University of the South, and then I worked very closely with the Truman Capote Literary Estate. So I could use all the words, which was fantastic. But when you also then have actors of a really important caliber come in and then make the voices come alive, it's a completely different thing. And
Which is something I was going to ask you about. How did
yeah,
you choose Jim Parsons and Zachary Quinto?
well, listen, first of all, I think the pandemic helped, okay, because people they were on sets, and but yes, they were the dream team. They were the dream team, but just because it's a dream team, it doesn't mean I could get it. And I have to say that they both really love this world, and huge fans of Tennessee, very much fans, both of them. And Zach, as you know, has done the Glass Menagerie, and he's a real fan and very, very knowledgeable of Tennessee Williams. And so it was cast like this, and it was Zach who said, "Oh, I know exactly who should be Truman Capote," and had a feeling he was going to say Jim Parsons, but they agreed to do it, and it's incredibly generous. I mean, just amazingly generous of them to be part of this. But I mean, this also goes toward the legacy of these men, of Capote and Tennessee, that you have these great actors who want to be attached to a project like this, because it's not that this is going to bring them. They don't need this film to bring them notoriety, but it's nice to have this kind of insight into this world with through the eyes of these actors. And it was, and I love this idea of voiceover, and and we did have. I've always worked with this idea of having a voiceover actress, and in Deanna Vreeland, The Eye Has to Travel, we had a voiceover actress who in fact had done Full Gallop on Broadway. She was the understudy for Mary Louise Wilson, and then she was really, really good. But there are some people that they didn't even understand sometimes that we were switching between the two of them. That sometimes you would see Deanna Vreeland on screen, and then all of a sudden you would just hear her voice, and the actress was so great that you couldn't tell the difference. And
It
it's
worked
almost
worked out very well in this case because the amount of footage or audio recordings there are of Capote and Williams speaking are limited.
they
Let
are.
their own work, and the two actors didn't. I was very happy to find they didn't do imitations,
Yep,
and I think that saved it because there's something about them getting the
yep.
sense, essence of the men that you were able to cut between actual audio and the actors, and it was fairly smooth. And I just felt like my ear adapted, and I knew who it was.
No, I think that that's the case. I mean, I feel that um, they enjoyed the process so much of doing it, and they gave so much of themselves, and they, the way that they work is that they want to feel the lines, and they bring a different kind of life to it, and it's something that I really enjoy doing. and because I feel that they can give so much to it. And we used Rupert Everett in Love Cecil because he ended up becoming Cecil Beaton in the film, and we had lots of Cecil Beaton in archival footage. But this just added. It's about the texture of a film, and all of these elements. Because in the case we had less visual elements in this film, except the words became our visual elements, and it was very clear that we were going to use archival imagery. We created a lot of footage ourselves. We shot a lot of with a Bolex, so we used a lot of 60mm film, and we did a lot of layering of imagery because we just wanted it all kind of to be like a dream, and to have these words come out of clouds and to come out of things, and I think it worked. I think it really worked. But then we also had like this amazing archive there, especially in this section of New York around Breakfast at Tiffany's, and when we're talking about alcoholism and addiction, there are these fantastic pictures that look like some of the old Warhol portraits, and they're all slightly distorted, and those are by photographer David Attie, Attie, and these are slides of his that were taken. These amazing photographs that haven't seen the light of day. And I worked with his son to use them. I think we have 28 images of it by him in the film. And it was such a treat. I mean, this is a man who studied with Alexei Brodovich, one of the best art directors in the world. And to have this kind of material, I mean, this is what makes me excited, because when you have all these elements and they can converge then with these beautiful words. And I mean, how lucky are we?
Well, you are, but we're also lucky that you found a way to take things that are in some ways different inherently in style. So you had that kind of artwork, as well as beautiful archival photos, as well as shots of magazine articles and live footage, and you sewed them together in a way that they were part of the story that we were following. Or that, yeah.
No, we hope so. We hope so.
How important were having the film clips? Because I found them significant, and there's a lot of them, which I couldn't help but thinking, I know they're not cheap. Why were those important?
I think kind of going back to the thought of trying to redefine the legacy of these people for a new generation. There's some people that have never seen any of these films, and it's important to really cement it in their minds with this imagery, with these words, with these actors. I mean, you look at Marlon Brando, and you look at that scene with Anna Magnani and Marlon Brando, or with Paul Newman. These are all they're part of film history, okay? And I think that they're important. We could have, for somebody like you who really knows the theater work so well, and I really don't, there's something about the cinematic aspect of those films that really brings it to life in a documentary, while the theater makes it always a little bit tougher. It just always does.
Yeah, most plays are not filmed to be seen in films. That's usually archival, and it's very hard to watch.
It is, and it doesn't, but there's this thing about a documentary, because just because it's a documentary, it doesn't mean that it cannot be cinematic. And that's that's the one thing that I'm always trying, is to make this game, because we've been fortunate enough to have all of our films play on a big screen in theaters, but it should be on a screen in a theater. I mean, that's the way that we envision it when we're making it. And so that's why, we're painstakingly making sure that every photograph is perfect, looks perfect, it has no marks, that the most beautiful film clips are in there. And but it's fun. It's fun to be incredibly anal about all those details.
Well, you succeeded. Tell me what's next in the pipeline. What are you working on now?
Oh, I'm working on a couple of things, but I'm actually working on Gertrude Stein. So that's going to be an interesting.
Are you in the research process now?
I'm in the research process, and it's going to be a challenge in itself, because we don't have that much footage. I mean, we have some things, But so I kind of figured out how I'm going to film it, and I think there will definitely be lots of voiceover. But it's a bigger challenge, but it's going to be. I think it's a great story to tell right now. You know, her words are so it's once again embedded in words. So it's embedded in words, but then it's also embedded in art, which is something that I like. I like the idea of these two worlds converging, because it's very much within my wheelhouse per se to deal with all of that. But you know, I have to say, as an experience of making a film, Truman in Tennessee was just such a delight to make, and it was. You can go. Sometimes it can be challenging just for, you know, obvious reasons, like financial reasons. You don't have the funds or this or that, and there was something just so delightful being able to tell this story, and working with Bernadine Kolish, who edited this film. She edited Love Cecil and Peggy Guggenheim. You know, we just fell in love with these words and being able to because we had a lot of freedom in being able to tell the story, and it was really nice to be able to do that, because you don't always feel like you have that freedom, because when you're telling someone's life story, you kind of feel like there have to be some certain historical markers you can include. We didn't have to deal with that here.
Absolutely.
So it was really, for me, it's been the best process of making a film that you know, and I really, and I just hope I've done the two of them justice. I mean, it's just a different way of looking at them and their legacy. And, you know, as I continue to look at the way that people are curating shows right now, and they're putting, like in a great show at the David Zwirner, putting Joseph Albers and Giorgio Morandi together, you know, they really have nothing to do with each other. But what it does, it's pushing us to look at their art in a different way.
Well, this is a perspective on both men that I don't think I've seen before, and the focus is on the words. And what could be more important for two writers than for us to hear the text, to hear it landing on the air? And it is letters, journals, all kinds of things, but it's a lot of their writing, and that's really, really important. Well, this is wonderful. And festival goers, are we goers? I guess we're going. We're going to our computers. Um, we'll have a chance to see Truman and Tennessee, an intimate conversation, on Sunday at 6 p.m. this Sunday. Just go to the Tennessee Williams New Orleans Literary Festival website and click on the schedule, and there will be a link to buy tickets. And this conversation has just flown. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. No, and thank you for inviting me. Also because you brought up the idea of inviting the film and me to the festival. So thank you for including us. It's an honor to be part of it.
Grateful to be able to see it. So,
thank you.
Okay, thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.